of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 160. The Meta-Liberation Army. Part 2. Times seemed to be blurring together, and, as was always the case with personal grief, the rest of the world continued on as though their pain didn't matter. As though the disappearance of Aizawa Shouta wasn't something that had blown a wide, still-smoking hole into the lives of those who knew and loved him. Who know and love him. He, gritting his teeth, the number one steeled himself before walking into the police force's largest tech lounge, where his nephew, Dabby, and Spinner were being kitted out with hidden cameras, wires, and the like. The closest firehouse to Daycast City has been incredibly helpful, of course. You'll find that the permits to conduct a surprise fire safety inspection have been filled in to allow you access to all areas of DetNet's HQ. He couldn't believe that his husband had been in the hands of this so-called army for 4 days now. As they gleaned further information, now Masa had started to theorize that they might have targeted Shouta not just because he was married to a symbol Redestro probably despised, but because of erasure. Our officers will be a maximum of 2 minutes away from the building at all times. We've been sneaking people in over the past 2 days as couples looking to rent apartments, so that their appearance won't arouse any suspicion. And with this city being on the outskirts of Tokyo, it wouldn't be considered suspicious for people to stop off at convenience stores and gas stations to fill up and walk around to stretch their legs either. If they were right about this army's intentions, aspirations, and abilities, then not only might they be interested in his partner's power to create further support items for sale, but to craft it into a weapon to use against their enemies. For Hisashi, sleep-deprived as he was, had come across a post which spoke at length about what an ideal society should look like. That those who had quirks should be free to use them, and anyone who felt differently, well, they shouldn't have the privilege of a quirk. They should have their quirks permanently removed. As the creators of Fire Dust, Aizawa, Dabi, and Tomra, having a meeting with DetNet's CEO to discuss investment opportunities for support-based gaming console controllers, gives them a credible reason to be there, and since the Northern Echo must have been under surveillance by the abductors, Yotsubashi Rikiya could potentially know who they are and give vital intel away, making a move we can arrest him for, or if Shigaraki wasn't off enjoying himself in his faux utopia, then he'd be convinced the old bastard was behind all of this.
Or, if he considers himself to be the leader of an army, he could put them in harm's way.
Letting a weary sigh escape him as Torino Sorahigo once again piped up his opinion, the so-called symbol of peace braced himself to use what little of his fraying patience was left.
Toshidori, you've spent the better part of 2 days fruitlessly rooting around in the mud under that estate, so I understand your frustrations, but getting civilians involved is
Shisho.
He cut in, his tone firm and expression resolved.
They're Shota's family. My family.
He furthered meaningfully.
Which means they're yours, too.
He furthered, the elder grumping at him under his breath.
They know what the dangers are, and thanks to Chenji-san's efforts and our connections with the new president of the Public Safety Commission, they have special permissions to use their quirks and fighting skills in self-defense.
He stated,
Not that we'll have to go down that route, because this plan of ours is mainly focusing on Spinner and his team, planting bugs whilst my 2 nephews run interference. We know from our surveillance that Shouta doesn't seem to be in Deka City, but this way, we can watch and listen out for information regarding where he is.
He reminded as the other huffed.
Just because they aren't pros, and just because you managed to cobble together a reasonable cover story is no reason for this mess you're potentially going to make.
The elder sniffed.
Back in mine and Nana's day, we'd simply fly in, grab the CEO you all seem so fixated on, and question him the old-fashioned way.
He bet up.
And why you're all so focused on this man and his supposed alias or his alleged army is beyond me.
He grunted, his right hand waving at a distinctly unimpressed Hisashi and Oboro, who were quietly leaning against the wall next to the sour-faced former powerhouse.
Well, Oji-san, I've tried my best not to take your lack of faith in us personally, here,
the DJ and pro teacher admitted, his fingerless gloved hand removing his orange lens glasses to appraise him, his frown dipping.
But even though my connections in Madripoor are a bit sketchy, there's no question that the ransom email came from there.
He said, his brows furrowing.
That girl I used to know was pretty savvy about these things, and on top of her making sure our systems weren't spiked by that bastard of a virus,
If it wasn't for her doing some stupid about, then we wouldn't have solid enough evidence to make this raid possible, he reminded, his expression grim. Feeling himself nod, Toshinori remained silent as he approached Tomer and his friend, his eyes checking them over whilst officers continued to hide the spyware in Dabi's flame-retardant blazer that'd keep them safe, and he continually updated as to the status in this situation. God, he hoped that this worked. It had to work. And besides, you've seen everything with your old, experienced eyes, haven't you, man? Ridestro has to be the leader of the Metal Liberation Army, and the authentic Metal Liberation Army post slogans and overall propaganda have all been traced back to that city, so the Detonaret mainframe and servers connected to their company, right? And you've seen all of his grungy videos and public service announcements too, haven't you? He snipped. Yotsubashi's always got a flock of fans simpering around him. Hell, even that politician guy we thought was Sho seems to be falling all over himself to praise him. And if that isn't the mark of a would-be dictator crazy enough to take Sho, then... He drifted off, his eyes screwing shut before he put his shades back on. The hurt that lanced through him was no doubt being felt by the others at those words. Hanabata Koku, the charismatic leader of the Hearts and Minds Party, had appeared on numerous CCTV feeds they'd looked into after Hizashi's friend had backtracked the ransom sum email that had been sent to them by a rival of hers in Lowtown Madripoor to the Detonaret company, and from certain angles, they all agreed that he looked so much like Shouta, and since he was often being led about by his private security liaison, it had appeared as though he was being taken from place to place by them and not with them. God, he wasn't sure how much more heartache, how many more dead ends he could take.
And it's not as though none of us want to go charging into Deka City,
Obaro added, his folded arms tightening.
Namori and her partners would have bolted straight there with Fatgum and the rest of us, but on top of the whole that shit is illegal thing, we've got to think about Sho. If we just went rushing in, then he could be hurt more than what he already has been. God, he could be anywhere. And since this army has thousands of members, he could be moved around the country at any moment, for all we know.
He growled. Gran Torino managed his free hand, scrubbing across his face.
I know. I'm sorry.
He admitted the tension he'd been building, swiftly leaching from his diminutive frame.
As much as I like to grouch at him, I hate waiting around.
He sighed, his head shaking.
Do what you feel you have to.
He nodded, his expression resolved.
And bring our Nekogaki home, all right?
To say that they'd been using their time away from Aldera Junior High wisely had to be one of the biggest understatements he'd come across in a while.
But how can we make them hear us? Neizuji is busily running away, Miraiji and Azuhiroji have been called away to that terrorist attack in Osaka, and the rest of the adults are either desperately following this army thing they're not telling us about, or doing their actual jobs.
However, at the rate they were going, the lead they'd been pursuing could fall on deaf ears.
Natsuoni's right. We need to get to Toshiji or the Pussycats now.
Humming to himself, Shinso Hitoshi regarded the clock whilst he weighed up their options. He, like the others, was 100% sure that the resident quirkless genius had found the true culprits responsible for stealing their beloved guardian. But since they were kids, since the adults in their lives were juggling so much on top of losing their minds with worry, they'd been kind of left here under the security that Japan's #1 hero course high school offered.
But they're not taking or answering our calls. They haven't since Monday afternoon when Hizashini made his big discovery. Get on.
As awful as it was, as likely as he was to face consequences that'd bar him from becoming a hero, he truly felt like his quirk was their best way forward, and for Shouta, he'd gladly give up on that dream and just focus on law school if it meant bringing him home.
I'm not getting any news from my mom either. She, Kimiko-san, Mitsuki-san, and Inko-san have all got those flowers, plants, students, and clients to think about, let alone the orders they just couldn't cancel, even with Kohagoji and Maeba-chan postponing their wedding until we've got Shoni back.
Because honestly, he wasn't sure what information the pros in their lives were going off, but as they sat here, he couldn't believe what they'd found thanks to Izuku's hunches and plans.
I know. I've told Toshiro-senpai several times, but Rappa-san, he
His vitals are stable, but the doctors just can't seem to wake him up no matter what they do. For how could anyone really overlook Kendo Ni's involvement? Eiichiro Katsuki and Tamaki-senpai had been dubious, but after they were able to swipe the coma-bound man's phone and clone it with an app their Deku had told the three of them to download just in case, they'd figured out his access code, 111111, wasn't exactly original, and peeked inside it.
Kegani and the others aren't responding either. I was hoping Jinny would at least let a clone stop by or something. I guess that they figure keeping us at a distance is a good thing since we're not bros. Or maybe Ochako was right and they just don't want us seeing how freaked out they are, you know?
All of the messages had been deleted, of course. But after going through his photo album, their group had found a few images shifted into the deleted album that hadn't been destroyed just yet. They'd contained some random things. However, the most telling ones were of people they'd never seen before. Of men. Some in beak-shaped masks and skulking around in partially lit areas, and one blind man in particular who Rappa had added the odd, angry, or condescending note about. Upon seeing them, Izuku and Katsuki had both proposed that they were significant in some way.
This is bullshit! Just because we're kids doesn't mean that they can put us on the sidelines like this!
And the rest of them had agreed. That's when, after they'd hurried through the schoolwork, Nijirai-senpai and the others helping, that they'd scored the internet for the men, seen at half-glances of the mostly blurred photos, of masks and their meanings, of a purple-colored unicorn that Rappa hadn't gifted to any of them, of the man himself who didn't seem to have any family or friends outside of their community, outside of the faceless men he'd snapped pictures of from time to time, which meant, of course, that Kendo Ni didn't seem to have anyone but them, and that...
Whoa, Kachan, simmer down there, buddy. Blowing stuff up isn't gonna help anything.
That struck a chord, didn't it?
Yeah, Bucka, bro. Come here, okay?
Hell, they'd all been there in one way or another.
Hey, G, let's go spar or something then. I'm 2 minutes away from losing it.
Without Shoni, most of them would have ended up friendless alone and without the sense of community family they'd all grown accustomed to.
Hey, there's a thought. We could try leaving UA's ground, you know? That could get someone to see us and listen to what we have to say, right?
This in turn had led them to hunting down the partial faces, the partial names that Rappa Kendo had left for someone to find, and at first it had been hard. The men didn't seem to exist. However, as they raked over past conversations with the man, after they thought about and tracked his life from place to place, they'd realized that his job as a bodyguard wasn't the fictitious life Toshiji and the others believed it was.
Ma, have you seen the supposedly non-killer robots that guard this place? I could try and shock them, but I don't think even my quirk could disable them all.
How had it only taken them the better part of 2 days to start piecing everything together? To see that their brawler older brother was actually a reluctant member of a group of a criminal organization. Something called the Yakuza. They'd referenced it on a search engine and really hadn't liked what they'd found. And that had made many of them sick to their stomachs. However, after pushing past the hurt, after trying to forgive the lies, they'd started to see things that made their blood run cold.
I believe you did, Kiki. You can do it.
Nijirai-senpai, please don't encourage him.
Things that involved fighting illegally for money, things that involved biting medical equipment, things that involved what appeared to be a small child being led somewhere by a tall man with his back to the camera, and a black banner covered in an intricate white design. A white design that looked like a flower. Wait.
Guys?
He breathed, his body sitting up so that he could grab his phone and wave at them.
Mimi-chan!
He stated, the rest of the room balking at him before they blinked and gaped. Mimi-chan and the girls!
She's going out with Soraji, right? She'll get them to listen.
Grinning madly back at him, Izuku was already pressing speed dial, whilst Mirio started marshalling the others to get their evidence in check and ready for their community's grandmothers to view. If anyone could bend the pros' ears and make them listen, then it was her and the other plucky women who adored them, wasn't it?